This is the tool itself. It's built on a mapping platform that we created at the reinvestment called Policy Map. It's very simple. It's designed to be really as simple as my colleague who created this thing. Like if you're going to the Target webpage, it needs to be just that simple so that you don't need to be a mapping expert to be able to figure out how to use this thing. And so if you can go to that Target webpage and figure out what it is that you want to buy, you can figure out how to use this CSI tool. So basically what you have is the ability to locate yourself on the map either by typing in an address in this bar here. You could select a neighborhood, and we have the 120-some neighborhoods of the city of Philadelphia. And we might quibble about what the boundaries are. These are the official ones. Maybe they'll change sometime. Each of the council districts, the planning districts, and the school catchment areas. So that's the way you navigate around on the map. In addition, you have the ability to both draw a map and to generate a report. All these things I'll show you in greater detail in a moment. Within that, you have data which will be displayed what we call as layers. So in other words, it's going to paint the map. And then you have the ability to show points. So it's going to actually show you a point on the map. Where is that library? And what does its census block group look like? So you could actually do both of those things simultaneously. The quality of life measures that we have are these. And again, this is not the exhaustive list. And we fully anticipate that there will be more before it's done. But you have the ability to look at the demand for housing, the stability of housing, public safety, education, amenities, prosperity, and commerce. And those are the basic indicators of quality of life so far. And again, I do want to emphasize, we know that it's not the comprehensive list yet. You can just click on any of those, and all of a sudden, boom, the map draws, and you're now looking at the housing demand index. If you click on this little detail up here, it tells you what comprises that housing demand index. And what comprises that demand index is the amount for which homes are sold, and these are actual transactions, not what people are guessing their homes are worth in the census, but actual transactions. We look at the percentage of properties that sold, and we look at the properties that are, we're looking at the extent to which there are properties with building permits on them, again, reflecting private investment in people's homes. And so when you look at that map and you see dark blue, what you're seeing is it's an area of high demand. And where you're seeing lighter colors, you're seeing that relative to other areas in the city, it's areas of lower demand based on those measures. We can also look at housing stability. Housing stability is a measure which is comprised of basically, I think, two things. One is the percentage of properties that are subject to a mortgage foreclosure at this moment. And the second thing is actually just taking a step back from the foreclosure, but the percentage of properties for which the lenders have issued what's known as a Pennsylvania Act 91 notice, which means you're about to go into foreclosure. And you have a right to be able to apply to the state for some help through one of the state-approved housing counseling agencies. And so what we're seeing here is, when that map is colored now, the areas for which the map is shaded in dark blue, you're seeing that those are places where there is great stability. In other words, there's not a lot of foreclosures relative to other areas of the city. There's not a lot of people on their way to foreclosure relative to other areas of the city. But again, where you see the light color, well, that's where there are issues. And again, you know, on a lot of these things, it may feel bad to see that that's the way your neighborhood is painted, but it doesn't help to not know that that's what's going on in your neighborhood. If there are a lot of foreclosures, you got to know it. If there's a lot of crime, you got to know it, and probably you already know it anyway. Again, safety. This is one where what we did was to take a look at, you know, not only the amount of crime within a place, but we also looked at a specific set of calls into the 311 system for the city, as well as vacant buildings and vacant land. Now, you may ask yourself, why vacant buildings and vacant land? Because experts around the country have figured that those vacant buildings oftentimes may not necessarily contribute necessarily to the actuality of a problem with public safety, but the perception or the feeling that there's an issue with public safety. So walking past the abandoned building, walking past that abandoned lot, that makes you feel unsafe. And if our goal is to figure out where are the places that are actually or perceptively unsafe, we ought to fold those into it. And so that's what you get in there. Each of those indices has their own set of components to it, and you have the ability not only to look at them this way, but if you wanted to go in, for example, and go into housing and look at each of the components separately, we'll go back to that, we will put on a map of foreclosure filings. And now, what you see here is the map is shaded so that the darkest blue areas have 4 or more % of their homes that were subject to a foreclosure filing between the period April 12 and March 2013. Those data need to be updated, and they can be, and they will be. So that's a lot, actually. That is, if you live on a row house block, that could be 1 or 2 houses on that row house block. And each one of those foreclosures adversely affects everybody else that's in there. And so again, you have the ability to look at the rolled up index and the specific components of it. And the importance of that, if you're the people who are making the policy and if you're the people who are making the decisions about how funds are to be distributed and allocated and the like, being able to see not only overall, is this a stable place, but very specifically, what's the issue in here? When we look at any neighborhood, be it West Oak Lane or Cedar Brook or or Castor Gardens or Ronhurst, any of those places, to be able to sort of drill in and say, like, what are the specific issues in this place? So let me just do a couple other things, and I think we ought to probably throw it up for discussion. Open for discussion would be a better way to say that. It's a long day. You can look, firstly, at that market value analysis, that first map that I showed you that said that's going to be the benchmark for things. You can look at some census data, age, population, households. You can look at race and ethnicity data, and you can look at income and educational attainment. The point level data are things like schools. So let's pop the schools on the map. All of a sudden now, the map is going to change a little bit, and you're going to be able to see every school in the city of Philadelphia. And by the way, if you wanted to know a little something about it, you could click on it. You just take your cursor and click on it, and what you find out is that that's Benjamin Franklin Elementary School. It's a K through 8. It's a district school. It's got 1,174 kids in it as of last year. Right? So on any of these things that have points, and there's a lot, you'll have, excuse me, you'll see information about libraries, rec centers, community gardens, parks, open space, bus lines, transit lines, bike lanes, bike racks. We put it in there. What can I say? Where grants have gone, how the block grant dollars have been spent, all that other kind of stuff. You'll be able to see that pop up as a point on the map, and you click on that point, and you could learn a little something about it. And that kind of transparency, that's going to be so important for you to think through, like, how is it that I'm going to make my place better, right? Because our elected officials, they want to hear from us. They want to hear what's your idea to make that place better? You're there. You know what it's like, right? That's what they want to hear. So you have that. In addition, you have the ability to draw up a report. And you can pick any neighborhood and draw a report. I'm going to pick up the neighborhood that I grew up in, just as an example to get the discussion started. I grew up in East Oak Lane, spent many years there. And it takes me right to that East Oak Lane area. If I want to generate a report, hang on one second. Pardon me? Okay. Let me go back to Matt. Report. Here we go. Sorry. You just go to that neighborhood 3 or 4 times, and then you click Get Report. And here's something I can tell you. I've learned this a lot. If you pound the keys harder, it definitely works better. So Get Report, it's going to quickly, well, almost quickly, generate a report. It will. Trust me. Here we go. Okay. So what you're seeing now is each of those different indices, and on each of the indices, you have a bar, and on that bar you'll see an orange portion. That orange portion represents what that particular index looks like in those yellow and blue areas. So in other words, that's sort of that aspirational middle for some areas, right? So for each one of these, again, amenities, commerce, education, housing demand, et cetera, you know what that middle looks like, where it is. In addition, for each one of the indexes, you have a little house. And that little house represents where this neighborhood is on that dimension. So if we look at my neighborhood, we find out that it did pretty good on amenities. We find out that it was doing pretty good on commerce. It's got some challenges in terms of education. It's doing okay on demand. It's got problems with its housing stability. It's doing reasonably well on prosperity and reasonably well on safety. Over the course of time, we're going to keep measuring these things. And what we're going to do is, next year when you look at this thing, or next quarter, or whenever it is that the thing comes out, you'll see that house. And there's going to be a new position for that house. And hopefully, if you were to look at that education house, that's going to move right there up into that middle orange. Or that housing stability, that's going to move up into that orange. And the idea would be, let's get the neighborhoods, all of them, at least into the orange, and then frankly, let's move the orange up, right? No reason we shouldn't aspire to have better on all these things. But let's make sure at a minimum, all our places are in that big steady middle. We could pull another neighborhood, because what I'd like to do is show you how neighborhoods are different. No neighborhood, no two neighborhoods are the same, right? So if we were to now go to the neighboring neighborhood, West Oak Lane, right? It's just immediately to the west. And we click its report. What you're going to see there is doing pretty well on amenities, doing pretty well on commerce, doing reasonably well. It's sort of right at the margin on education. It's got issues with demand and stability of its housing market. It's doing okay on prosperity and safety. Now I'm going to bounce back and forth very quickly between two neighborhoods to show you sort of that neighborhood DNA. They're different. No two are the same. And by drilling down on each of these different indexes, it helps you figure out, what do I need to concentrate on here, right? So if I were to look at East Oak Lane and now West Oak Lane, let's put them in the same place so it's not bouncing for you. Give me 1 second. Look at where those houses move. You're in East Oak Lane now and West Oak Lane. See how they're going? It shows you how one area with respect to another is either performing better or less well on any of those particular measures. And so it helps you figure out which way, what kind of intervention do I need to do to be able to get this thing. We want them all there up in that little orange portion of that bar. I think that's everything that I'd like to show you about the tool. And now we get into the interactive portion, right?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Big hand. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ira. So now for the exciting part where you guys get to ask us questions. Rep, you want to come up here? You good? Sure. All right. As both myself and Ira reference, I think the most significant part of having this tool is for your elected officials as we make those decisions on budgeting and legislation. It's important for us to understand how we need to target the budget, how we need to prioritize certain aspects of what we do. But again, your input in this is of utmost importance, because without your participation in this process, we don't think that we'll get the full picture of that. Because at the end of the day, you live in these communities, you in some capacity represent these communities, so what you all say about this is very important. So we're actually going to be starting that process. As I said earlier, we're going to be out in your neighborhoods. The council members will be hosting those meetings in the various neighborhoods so we can get down to the nitty-gritty and to talk about finalizing this document, so then at some point it could be available to the public, so we can really get a clear sense of what we're going to be doing. Thank you very much. So with that, I guess we're supposed to open it up for questions. And Calvin. Oh, you know what? I think we have microphones here and a cordless one right there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all. I recall about at least 2 decades ago that the Philadelphia Business Journal used to put out a report similar to this on a yearly basis with all of these same statistical things. And I know I used to subscribe to it. And I know that was available at that time to the same body that we have here today. And I'm wondering now what will be different with this new tool that we had, an old tool, what's going to make the difference now?
Councilman, you want? Actually, I can say for myself, I actually don't remember the Philadelphia Business Journal having such a tool, I guess because I didn't read it. So that's my fault. So I personally can't give you a response because I've never seen it before.
I don't know what that is.
Oh, all right. You familiar with it?
I'm too old to be doing this here. What's going to be different about it is the geographic resolution and the very specific content of it. So organizations like the Business Journal and the like have always done things like city rankings and the like, and sometimes they even drill down to like zip codes and things of that nature. But there has not been, for Philadelphia, drilled down this small, like these block groups, some of them are 4 or 5 blocks across, so they're actually pretty small. There has not been such a thing on a regular and recurring basis. And so that would be, I would say, is a big difference.
Yeah, for me, it's, you know, when we went over the presentation regarding this tool some time ago, and for me, the interesting component is that it's data-driven. It provides an opportunity for us as council members to take the pulse of the neighborhoods and the district in which we represent and use that data to help us prioritize if we're focusing on education, if we're focusing on policy, housing stock, health, and the overall well-being and quality of life of the actual neighborhoods within the district in which we represent. And so for me, it's a tool in which I welcome, primarily because it's data-driven. It allows us to prioritize our budget and our own individual resources as district council individuals to make our priorities in terms of improving the quality of life throughout our district.
Good evening. I'd like to add to that. My name is Blonda Reynolds Brown, and I come with an at-large, citywide perspective, which has its value. The difference between 20 years ago and now, I would add, is it's accessible to anyone and everyone who cares about the little corner of the world where they live, which helps us when neighbors, citizens, block captains, committee people show up at council hearings, because they too know what the data is and can aid us as we move to make critical decisions surrounding various communities. So that's one distinctive difference I see from 20 years ago, where you were deeply informed and aware of what's going on, and now where information like this is available for everybody.
I think Councilman Jones and Councilwoman Tasco, I think you were.
As an elected official, you have to be a little bit of an urban planner. As Councilman Johnson said, it should be data-driven. But this is just a tool. A hammer in some people's hands will do nothing but collect rust. A hammer in some people's hands will build a house. What is interesting about this is all of the data is in one location. Having done development, it takes a considerable amount of time for a business to make a decision about a location or individual to make a decision about buying a house. If you can point and click, and decide what the school levels are, what the violence or perception of safety is, what types of amenities you want, because it's different strokes for different folks. We find out every day that we think we're doing something, we're gonna build this beautiful skate park in this area. And we're excited about it. We're going to get all of the bells and whistles. And then the seniors in the neighborhood say, I'm not using that. If you'd have asked me, you'd have known that I'd rather have a passive walking park or someplace to sit. So this gives us a tool to open and for you to be able to measure us by. If those indicators aren't where they should be over a period of time, you said quarterly reporting, Council President, then we get grades about that. So if you don't have a perception of safety someplace and we don't make public policy decisions that improves that, then we should be held accountable. Because good data, if formulated like this, becomes good information. Good information becomes good decisions. Good decisions makes good public policy. And that's why I'm excited about this.
I just wanted to say that for me, it's good in that I'm West Oak Lane and East Oak Lane. That's where I represent. And so as I work in council with my colleagues, having the data to show that we do have somewhat of a stable neighborhood, but there are problems. And when we're doing the budget, when we have to cut up the pie, and I'm fighting to get to deal with some of the issues in my neighborhood, then they can see what's real. And so instead of me saying, well, I need dollars for my seniors who are on fixed income, and we need some money to help them fix up their home, and they said, well, the funds are based on federal guidelines or something like that. And so you really can't get that. So it's a concept, having this information helps us, as Council President said earlier, as we deal with our budget, for all of the council members to understand what's happening all over the city and not guess at it, but have the facts.
Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you very much. It's important for other reasons too. If we look, for example, at housing stability, I represent the Promise Zone. I represent Mantua. I fought all these years since I've been in office, more than 30 years, to have my poorest, worst neighborhood, the highest area of crime, infant mortality, you name it. And now there's been a focus. I can look up Mantua, I'm sure. Now, every day I learn about people who want to invest. This helps us figure out, if we look at housing stability, what does that mean? Does that mean that I have all these developers who want to come in because they just want to? And how will that affect issues like gentrification? I fought for 35 years to help fix up the area, but I didn't do it so that people would lose their homes, so that their taxes would go up so high, and that people who've been there for 4 and 5 generations can't stay. So this is a tool that even helps us with important questions like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Real quick, I know we have another question. Here's an example based on what we've put together so far. We actually had a meeting up in Councilwoman Bass's district, a preliminary meeting. And we pulled up the data on public safety, and that data showed that there was actually, it said that the crime index was higher in a part of my district that happens to be down in Center City than it was in certain other parts of my district that happen to be in North Philadelphia. And people say, well, something's wrong. Something's wrong. But when you dig down into it, you see that the number of crimes was actually what drove the conversation and drove the data that said, well, there are more crimes because there are more crimes, actually more crimes reported in certain parts of the city than they are in others. So if they get 911 calls for a car gets broken into and somebody calls 911, and in some parts of the city, the car gets broken in, they say, okay, well, they didn't take my car. I'm okay, I'm not calling the police, don't want to pay that $500 deductible. I'm just being real. So, but that's why it's important to dig a little deeper into the data, because you have to get a real sense, and that's where the neighborhood portion of this process comes in. You understand your communities a little more than actually the data does. So those are the examples of the ability and the need to have people involved at this ground level to make sure that as we pull this data together and go live, that it's accurate and it reflects the realities of what actually happens in those neighborhoods. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I live in your district in the the zip
Congratulations,
code.
you have the best council person, second only to the ones up here.
I live in the only zip code in the city that has grown in population for generations at this point. But I had an interest